Hi, I'm Lindsay and this is my Fallout channel. Be warned, there's gonna be game and TV spoilers. And I talk about how the themes of Fallout connect to the real world, so the chances of me offending you by accident are high. I'm just throwing stuff out there to see if you catch it. If it hits you in the face, remember, you were warned. This one's for the norms. The misfits, the truth tellers and truth seekers. Y'all, I'm not gonna lie. I have been neurotically obsessing over this script for months, because there's no way I'm gonna say what I want to say without pissing a lot of people off. So I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off, right at the top, throw out the incendiary shit first, and you can decide if you want to stick it out for the whole video. I love Norm, just so there's no ambiguity here. I think he's a sympathetic character we're supposed to care about and root for. I also see Norm's character as mirroring a particular demographic that is not gonna like being called out. I'm talking about privileged white males who have lost faith in society, who end up drawn to contentious countercultural online movements because they don't know they're autistic. Which is kind of funny because Moises Arias is not white! Can I call this whiteface? Is that offensive? Is it offensive that I'm wondering if it's offensive? All I know is this is a man of color embodying the perspective of an angry privileged white boy like a champ. And race flippies make people think thoughts and feel feelings, and I'll just be over here making the popcorn. If the word privilege makes you want to scream, I recommend you watch my video Privilege Ignorance first, so you know I don't use the word privilege as an insult. Ignorance is a problem, privilege is a neutral concept and a good thing in plenty of cases. If the word autism makes you want to scream, my dudes, this is said with love, unfollow me on all the things. I'm an autistic person with an autistic special interest in autism. It's gonna cross my mind. While writing this, I realized the norm types watching this were more than likely going to investigate me and the things I said after watching. Upon doing so, they would quickly discover that I sell books and classes to autistic people, and may feel preyed upon. Like Lindsay tried to convince me I was autistic so I would buy her shit. I'm disclosing this before the video because in my experience, norms feel much more at ease when people disclose this kind of thing ahead of time. Otherwise, it may look like I lured you into a false sense of security, and then like bam, there's the sign up for my mailing list for a 10% off coupon code. I am not about that life. So let's lay all my cards out on the table. Generally speaking, I can't help autistic people who don't know they're autistic. I'm not gonna show up in their algorithm. So this video provides a unique opportunity to broaden awareness of the autistic experience beyond the highly insulated neurodivergent cultural bubble. So yeah, there might be times when my video is going to sound like it's trying to be persuasive. I just want to take this moment to remind you there's a difference between persuasion and manipulation. I promise I know that you are in charge. You decide to take in or reject anything I have to say, and you can have whatever opinion you want about my job. I may have an agenda to bring attention to autism in a particular way, but there's no reason to feel threatened by that because I have no power. I just have a huge stake in the outcome, and it's not exclusively financial. I promise you, if my primary motivator were making money, I would have picked something else. Helping autistic people is not a lucrative enterprise, I assure you. It's not like I don't want you to buy my shit, of course I do. Don't be a Bob. Don't judge people for needing to make money in a prison that forces them to make money. I'm just an autistic person, repping autistic people. Nothing more to it than that. Let's zoom through a quick Autism 101 so you can see where I'm coming from when I say Norm is doing autistic shit. What is autism? The term autism is just a tool to help people with particular needs address those needs. You may be thinking, no, autism is a medical diagnosis. It is! And a medical diagnosis is a tool that helps people with particular needs address those needs. That is the function of a medical diagnosis. You have problem, learn what caused problem, now can solve problem. Some say people like me shouldn't talk about autism because we aren't doctors, but not all doctors are autism experts and not everyone with autism has access to doctors. And we don't have time to wallow in self-pity and victimhood while the medical community deliberates over whether or not it can afford to accommodate us. So we address our own needs, like adults. Not everyone with plumbing issues has access to a plumber or a plumbing certification, so sometimes they just have to grab a wrench. The word autism is like that wrench. Maybe in the hands of a seasoned professional, it would be a more effective tool, but that doesn't mean it's dangerous in the hands of an average person. A person identifying as autistic is using the term as a tool to address their autistic problems because it's the best tool for the job. Without that tool, how would you ever know that maybe the reason you snap at your boss all the time is because the lights in your office are too bright? And you may never come across the term sensory needs, and if you're autistic, I assure you, you've got them. So what kind of person needs this tool that is the term autism? Well, luckily Fallout provides excellent points of reference. An autistic person is like a focused build character. Like your brain has min-maxed its special stats. We start off in just a couple of categories, and then as new points come in, we just stack those areas higher and higher. I'm talking about something called monotropism, if you want to Google after me. But in the human brain, we have way more than 7 categories. We don't choose where our points go, and we don't have a Pip-Boy to lay out our stats. That's why autistic people are all so different, and why we have to figure all of this out with an excruciating lifelong guess and check operation, recalibrating every time someone is mad at us and we don't know why. The most universal struggle across autistic brains is going to be pivoting. It's like our minds are in clusters with distance between them. So unless we're talking about like an ingrained daily routine, we need ample transition time to go from one activity to another. It's like playing Fallout without fast travel. While others zip around their mental map, we have to traverse each path step by step. Neurotypical and holistic people have a sort of cognitive fast travel. They have a fluid relationship with reality and other people that we don't. This makes our experience very different. It's slower and more solitary, but it also provides a unique, detailed perspective of the world. And no fault of theirs, holistic people just have no idea that fast travel isn't universal. That's their privilege ignorance issue. So they don't have any frame of reference to make sense of weird autistic behavior, and the cruel assumptions they make because of that make life really hard for autistic people. But even so, many autistic people don't want the fast travel option. We value the rich details found along our slower paths. So over time, playing the game alone, so to speak, walking every path meticulously, it leads to us seeing the world so differently from other people, it's like we live in a bubble. But it's very lonely. We figure out trying to make sense of the world through their lens doesn't work for us, so we end up building a whole mental map that is out of sync with them, and we grow more and more distant from the world, like we're watching it through a screen. When our entire reality from childhood revolves around the understanding that the fundamental rules of being a person don't apply to us, we feel like we aren't really people. There's a feeling of being an alien, that everything we're looking at is a construction, one that wasn't built with us in mind. Whatever these rules apply to, we aren't that. So what are we? At the start of the season, we meet Lucy and quickly see how close she is with her dad, Hank. Lucy tries to start a so-called family book club, but it appears to really just be her and her dad. Norm, her brother, appears clearly disinterested. And yet, she says, "We're still trying to get my brother on board. He'll come around when he's ready." As charming as this is, it suggests a certain egoism on Lucy's part, assuming that he is better off doing what she wants than what he wants. When the Vault citizens are setting the stage for Lucy's wedding, Hank adjusts some flowers, but when he sees Norm on the Pip-Boy, he shouts for him to pay attention and makes a tense face. As an autistic kid who was regularly disappointing to her mother, I know this face very well. When Hank and Norm walk Lucy down the vault corridor to her ceremony, Norm and Lucy bicker like typical siblings. Norm teases her about the uncertainties of her future husband, his looks, his butt size. Hank gives Norm a disapproving look, but Norm just shrugs it off, saying, "Of course these are superficial concerns. It's what's on the inside that counts," to which Hank agrees. But Norm can't resist adding a bit more snark, and in that respect he could be a cannibal or full of tumors. That gets a sharp reaction out of Hank. "Norman!" But Norm backs off. He says, "Sorry, Dad," showing a little bit of respect. Norm may not be ideologically aligned with the Vault's culture. However, he supports his family and understands his role. And it's kind of a subservient one. The group from Vault 33 approaches the gate to meet Lucy's mysterious fiancé and the other guests from Vault 32. We don't cut to Norm's face during these events, but he was there to witness them, so they're worth covering. Chet, the gatekeeper, hesitates to open the gate because he's in love with Lucy. Lucy turns him down because they are cousins, and the Vault has rules against that for a reason. When the gate finally opens, Hank warmly greets Vault 32 and its overseer, who introduces herself as Lee Moldaver. We know from watching the show that this character isn't the actual overseer of Vault 32. Lee Moldaver is a name well known across the wasteland. It seems rather bold for her to use her real name if she's trying to remain undercover, which raises an intriguing question that pops up throughout the show. If someone seems sloppy or like they're acting against their own best interests, we should be asking, are they being overly confident or deceptively clever? And this is when Hank trades seeds and parts for machinery for breeding stock. Oh yeah, and his daughter's there in a pretty white dress. Marriage is inherently dehumanizing, but I don't kink shame. If that's your thing, you sign those filthy, filthy documents, you freaks. Lucy asks who she's marrying, and out comes Raider Imposter Monty. From now on, I'll refer to him as Wasteland Chad. Now that he's proven to be a hunk, Lucy smirks over at Steph, who's implied to be her best friend. And Steph says "lucky" under her breath, and her husband Bert gives her a glorious big eye what the fuck look. It's worth it to contrast this moment with the sentiments expressed in the corridor between Lucy, Norm, and Hank. While Lucy and Hank seem to downplay the importance of superficialities, Lucy's reaction upon seeing Wasteland Chad suggests that appearance may be more influential than she and Hank had initially admitted. At Lucy's wedding, Hank delivers a heartfelt speech praising her as a shining example of Vault values and how her wedding affirms his belief that she will make the world a better place. Norm has likely grown accustomed to hearing his sister celebrated as the golden child. He's sitting right across from Lee Moldaver, and he's already looking at her suspiciously. He knows something's not right, but he doesn't know what. The wedding ends with a reception, and Lucy and Hank dance. Lucy waves her hand to invite Norm to join them, and he does. This is consistent with the idea that Norm doesn't submit to Vault culture because he's loyal to the Vault, he does it because he's loyal to his family. Vault traditions don't mean much to Norm personally, but Lucy and Hank do. He's only gonna put up with Vault nonsense as long as it benefits them, because he doesn't feel like it benefits him. Lucy leaves the reception with Monty so that he may enjoy her coffee pot, Moldaver watches them go, and Norm watches Moldaver with that look on his face that says, something about Vault 32 does not seem right. So after the excitement has died down, Norm makes his way toward Vault 32, curiosity piqued. Why was Vault 32 totally exposed? Was someone being a little too smug or clever? As he steps inside and sees the farms, it looks like it's been deserted for some time. Moises Arias here is fantastic. We watch every detail of his face morph from fear to determination. I have to look up how to pronounce his name every single time I say it because I am white. He continues and the surroundings grow increasingly chaotic. Things are destroyed and knocked over, and there's junk strewn about that makes fans of the Fallout games go, hey, this totally looks like a Fallout game. After turning a couple corners, Norm stumbles upon a dead body in a rocking chair, and yikes, he sprints back towards safety. Okay, scratch that, he actually sprints toward violence. So much violence. There's blood and shooting and stabbing and eating cake with your hands. Truly uncivilized. We get a strong shot of Moldaver marching across the corridor with Raider goons in tow. Woody makes sure we know it's time to get that Jell-O cake out of there. This is not a time for Jell-O cake. The Telesonic projector gets damaged and the film starts melting, making the surrounding scenery look like the Great War is happening all over again, which was a brilliant idea. Norm hides under one of the picnic tables, watching in horror as raiders slaughter the people he grew up with right before his eyes. One of the raiders spots him and drags him out from under there. Just as things look dire, Lucy swoops in to save him at the last second and rushes him to a floor storage unit for safety. As he turns to go in, he gives her a questioning look. She just shakes her head. A silent exchange that could be interpreted different ways. His face was asking her if she needs his help, if she's truly planning on going out there on her own. When she shook her head, she probably intended to sternly tell him it would be a bad idea for him to try anything. But from his perspective, he probably felt like a baby being put to bed with a bottle and blanket. Seeing his people suffer this kind of assault and feeling like there was nothing he could do about it is going to be a huge point of shame for Norm, probably for the rest of his life. Trigger warning, I'm about to bring gender into this, even though it isn't explicitly mentioned. Last time I did that, it didn't go so well, so this time I at least want to admit I know I'm taking a big swing here. The raider that was about to kill Norm was female. And obviously his sister who rescued him, also female. Now I don't think that Norm the character gives a crap about gender at all. I do think it's relevant though to the audience. I already warned you I think Norm is a reflection of a particular demographic. That demographic is unfortunately often associated with, let's say, anti-feminist schools of thought. I'm not saying this is a dog whistle, I'm saying they know their audience. This scene is supposed to show us why Norm feels weak and emasculated. Of course, being nearly killed by a woman and then having to be rescued by your sister would make the guys I'm talking about feel weak and emasculated. These guys started rooting for Norm in the corridor. And then when Lucy and Steph swooned over Wasteland Chad, they scoffed and rolled their eyes. The show is making an appeal to the guys who think progressive gender reform is a load of crap, and think it's common sense that men are supposed to be stronger than women, and when push comes to shove, women actually want it that way. I'm not saying how I think it is, I'm saying how I think a lot of guys think it looks. After all of this hullabaloo, Moldaver vanishes with Hank and leaves the residents of Vault 31 to lick their wounds. The Vault has a meeting to discuss, what the hell just happened. In Hank's absence, a new trio seems to be running things temporarily. Woody, Reg, and Betty. I'm gonna call them the co-overseers. Get it? Like co-overseers? Yeah. Lucy stands up and proposes that they organize a search party to go out to the surface and look for Hank. But the co-overseers are adamant about not opening the vault door, even briefly. Betty insists that the security of the vault is their top priority, and dismisses the idea of rescuing Hank outright like he's already gone. Norm bitterly points out, they don't want to find Dad. If they did, they wouldn't get to be in charge. This is the first instance where we see Norm exhibit a common autistic behavior I'll call the autistic bird's eye view. Earlier in the video I explained how autistic people often develop mental maps that don't align with the people around them, creating a sense of distance as if we're observing others through a screen. We'll see throughout the season how Norm talks to and relates to other people with a sort of meta-awareness, almost like he's the one talking about TV show characters. Lucy needed that out-of-the-vault thinking in this moment to propel her forward. Heck yeah, neurodiversity! Now Norm's gonna do the punk rock thing and help Lucy break out of the joint. While waiting by the elevator, Norm smacks a Nuka-Cola machine, but sees Davy and tries to act natural. He asks Davy how his day is going, and Davy responds with a grim, "Bad as everyone else's." This was a pretty relatable autistic moment in general. We observe social norms and do our best to learn the rules so we don't look weird, and yet we always look weird anyway. There's always some piece of context we miss that makes whatever we did wrong. Right before Chet is about to open the gate, Lucy tells him to take care of Norm while she's gone, and then lovingly tranquilizes him. She half-jokingly warns Norm that she'll do the same to him if he tries to follow her. But Norm says, "I'm too chicken, thanks." He mixes self-deprecating humor with a hint of pain. It's clear that they both understand the gravity of the task ahead, and both believe that Lucy is the one suited for it, not him. Even by telling Chet to watch out for Norm, she's reinforcing the idea that she is capable and Norm is helpless. As they say their goodbyes with a hug, Norm doesn't simply walk away. He keeps his eyes on her and walks backwards for a little bit, which I found really interesting. It subtly suggests that moving away from the door, away from Lucy and Hank, but toward the vault is a backwards move for him. His physical body may be on the way back in, but his heart and his mind are looking outward. Meanwhile, Reg and Davy make what could at best be called a half-hearted attempt to stop Lucy. After she's out, Davy's lackluster, "That didn't work," highlights kind of an indifference to her departure. In Fallout, you really have to not only look at the choices that people make, but the attitudes that they have about the choices that are made. Norm and Chet are brought before the Overseers to answer for opening the vault door and letting Lucy escape. They take away Chet's role as gatekeeper, a job that defined his identity, leaving him in a personal crisis. I shouldn't be laughing, but he's having such a cute little crisis. Norm's interrogation begins with the Overseers detailing how he endangered everyone in all three vaults by increasing the risk of radiation exposure and security breaches that raiders could exploit. They point out the recent raider attack was only made possible because a Vault Dweller's Pip-Boy was used. So Vault Dwellers should obviously be more responsible. Norm tells him that the breakout was Lucy's idea, and when asked if he thought about stopping her, he replies no, with a hint of astonishment. It strikes Norm as obvious that he would be loyal to his father and his sister before being loyal to the Vault. Why would they expect otherwise? Then he asks, possibly rhetorically, "What are we gonna do with you?" But Norm, with a classic autistic preference for literal communication, answers her. "Punish me with a demotion, I guess." Reviewing his work history, the Overseers find a pattern of lackluster performance in various roles, from janitorial to kitchen duties, each noted for a lack of enthusiasm. When asked how he feels about his current job, Norm dryly affirms, "I lack enthusiasm." Woody is like, "The hubris." He's like, "Look at this kid carrying himself with the confidence of a mediocre white man." Norm leans in confidently as he says, "It's a predicament, isn't it? How do you demote someone who equally dislikes every job he's ever worked?" I like to call this whole thing the Office Space scene. If you haven't seen it, Office Space is a 1999 comedy that satirizes the monotonous and soul-crushing life of corporate office workers. The company is facing layoffs, so there are business consultants who interview employees with a thinly veiled goal of determining whether or not their jobs are worth the expense. Most characters go into these interviews absolutely terrified, but our main guy, Peter, has lost all respect for the company and everything it represents, so he is hilariously honest.
I'd say in a given week, I probably only do about 15 minutes of real, actual work.
The scene with Norm is similar, not just in the nonchalant attitude of the person in the hot seat, but his overall position. Why should he care?
It's a problem of motivation, all right?
How have they earned this obedience that they insist that they should have? This standoff presents an opportunity to explain autistic people and our need for social justice. We are strongly associated with that shit. What we want are clear rules and consistency so that we know what to expect from others and what others are going to expect from us. It's hard for us to adapt to someone else's rules in general, so if we're going to do it, we want bang for our buck. If they're going to tell us that the rules are in place to prevent harm, then if someone else breaks those rules and causes harm, they better be held accountable. Otherwise, why are we following those rules? Why would we obey a system that openly doesn't prioritize our interests? Vault-Tec nonsense has probably always made Norm miserable, but he was fine with playing along if it was keeping them all safe and alive and it was making Hank and Lucy happy. But if Hank and Lucy are gone, no one is going after them, and nothing's being done about the ruthless killers from the outside.
So where's the motivation?
So it makes sense, Norm would say. I'm just glad to hear we punish people down here for breaking the rules. Is that just for Vault Dwellers or for people who come down here and murder Vault Dwellers? A little sarcastic here, I'll admit, for an autistic person, but it's clear that Norm has that allistic indirectness down pat. It's the unabashed display of where his loyalties lie that's so autistic. Autistic people will always be more loyal to things making sense than to other people. If other people ask us to believe something that makes no sense, we stop trusting those people on principle. Allistics, on the other hand, are loyal to other people first and things making sense is secondary, which is actually fair and works fine in some contexts. There are times in life when we really should just trust people and move on because there's no time to break down all the data. Neurodiversity, it's a party. But when an autistic person demands that things make sense, it's a mistake to interpret that only as not respecting authority. I mean, technically, we're not respecting authority, but the problematic misconception is that we can help it. Autistic people need things to make sense in order for our brains to construct meaningful action. If you want autistic cooperation, make it make sense. But of course the co-overseers feel insulted, so they assign him the most humiliating role given the circumstances, bringing the raiders who brutally attacked his community lunch. Seems a little unwise to put someone who clearly wants justice against the raiders in a position where he's giving them their food, but hey, smug or clever? The Vault has a community meeting to decide the fate of the captured raiders. And y'all, just before we get into this scene, let me make sure you know where I'm coming from. In my own head, of course, I consider myself an independent thinker, assessing each issue on its own merits, examining all the relevant context, and forming my own conclusions. I think I am my own person, like you or anybody else. I don't pledge fealty to any labels like Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, progressive, whatever. That being said, fine, whatever, I'm a progressive. I concede that it is fair to call me that, at least for the time being. I recognize that I am an infinitely complex, ever-evolving spirit, but I can't control how others perceive me. People don't have the time to understand every nuance of every individual they meet, so categorization is not just inevitable, it's necessary. And the fact is, if people were to map out all the conclusions I've reached as an independent thinker, they're going to notice a distinctly progressive pattern. And it would be gaslighty of me to insist otherwise. This scene is filled with satire targeting progressives. So I think it's important to understand that I am one.
I'm one of them.
When I argue how well-deserved it is. Woody and Reg stand at the podium spouting platitudes about showing kindness to their enemies. Betty presents herself as more pragmatic than the other two. Reg proposes a rehabilitation program to integrate the Raiders into Vault society, a suggestion met with visible disapproval from Steph, fresh from battle and now sporting an iconic eye patch, Slay Queen. Her stern expression, highlighted by strategic lighting, signals her strong disappointment. Davy's suggestion to educate the Raiders in Shakespeare and Marlowe is challenged by Marianne, who doubts their readiness for such advanced material. Someone suggests teaching the Raiders calculus, and Norm outright laughs. The debate takes a darker turn when Norm, ever blunt, makes the statement we all need to hear. I don't think it's our job to help these people. This was perfect. He didn't start by suggesting they should violently retaliate against the Raiders. He focused on what their appropriate role in the situation is, and it's not their place to correct these raiders. I talk about this a lot more in the privilege ignorance video, but progressive idealism can be very egocentric. We can be so caught up in our desire to make the world a better place that we lose sight that we are projecting our very limited worldview of what a better place looks like. The Vault Dwellers' assertion that they don't know any better is based on the presumption that the Vault does know better. What they call a formal education will only ever reflect their own standards of what knowledge they deem valuable. It's not going to be universal. So whether or not anyone from the outside adopts their culture or worldview should be their choice. I'm a couple decades late on this one, but 7 of 9 should have told Janeway and the Doctor to shove it. Reg says they can't just let the Raiders go because they know too much about Vault security. So Norm suggests they treat the Raiders as the Raiders would have treated them, implying execution. This causes a stir. Steph is rather energetically intrigued. Betty quickly steps in to temper the emotions, asserting that young Norm was merely expressing a feeling, and that killing people was not a viable option. Norm looks satisfied with having voiced his opinion. He feels emboldened, perceiving himself as more courageous than his peers. What he hasn't considered yet is that he's shown his cards. Autistic people have a tendency to believe that if something is true, we should be able to say it. Context be damned. We'll dive deeper into this as we go. For now, we should notice that Norm is irritated at people being idealistic and naive, while he himself is being idealistic and naive. He's proud of himself for being courageous and honest. That's idealistic. In doing so, he has made himself vulnerable to people who can use what he has said against him. That is naive. Amid the heated discussion, a Vault Dweller, who we're gonna call the water chip guy, interrupts with urgent news about the Vault's water chip. A nice reference to our favorite MacGuffin from Fallout 1. He insists on a private conversation, but Reg and Woody, wanting to look like they have an open door policy, make him publicly reveal that the water chip is destroyed and the vault has only 2 months' water supply left. This naturally unsettles the group, so the Coverseers blow him off and kind of shoo him away. He makes a face like, what, because we can't have this conversation in front of everyone? We can't have it at all? In progressive conversations, we tend to have a core value that people are entitled to question their leadership, which is fair. We know we're all flawed human beings and no one inherently deserves more power than anyone else. It has to be earned with trust, transparency, and a track record of ensuring fairness and inclusivity. Consequently, when we're in leadership positions, we're afraid we won't be as respected if we carry on like we believe we know better than everyone else in the group. This perspective can be impractical. All people can't handle all truths at all times. Thoughtful dissemination of information is a necessary evil. Unfortunately, striking the balance between when to bring people into the decision-making process and when to pull rank is tricky, messy, and case by case. Following the chaos, Steph quietly approaches Norm and nudges him toward his harsh stance on dealing with the Raiders. She hints there might be some merit to his suggestions without overtly endorsing them. See, Norm showed his hand to the whole room, but Steph did not. Later on, when he's sitting alone with his thoughts about the vault's dire circumstances, Norm is approached by Betty with rhubarb pie and ice cream. She reminisces about the first time he tried it, making an appeal to his sentimentality. Norm cuts to the chase. "You came here to talk to me about what I said at the assembly." She asks, "And why do you think that is?" He says, "It upset people. You don't like it when people get upset." Once again, we're seeing Norm's autistic bird's eye view. He's recognizing Betty's patterns from an outside perspective and commenting on them neutrally. But Betty anticipates this, making there something unsettlingly infantilizing about this conversation. She prompted him like he was well-trained, like they've had post-mortem meetings like this before. It's like when a parent corners a child and is like, "What did you do?" And the child is like, "I stole a twuck, and that was wrong." Also struck kind of a weird chord when she called him young Norm at the meeting, Then Betty reminds him of his unique position in the community. With his sister gone and his father missing, he's the last McLean standing, giving his opinion significant influence. She says, "Your voice carries more weight than you might realize." Norm is still reeling in his shame over his cowardice. So he says, "I hid. During the raid, I got in the storage space and I hid." Betty questions if this makes him angry, and he asks her why that matters. She says, "Regular boys can get angry and they'll just pee on the wall. When clever boys like you are angry, you're lucky to not have seen where that can lead." And then she advises him to tread lightly. Betty telling him to tread carefully, that's all she asks, might suggest, okay, if you're going to kill the Raiders, fine, just do it quietly. I think that's what we're supposed to be thinking, but I don't think it's the sneakiest thing going on here. This scene gives me the creeps because Betty is exploiting Norm's weak point in a way that I am intimately familiar with. Believing oneself to be a tortured genius is a very accessible coping mechanism for the traumatized, privileged, unaware autistic, and the privilege component is important. Remember when I said that autistic people are like focused build characters? Privilege can protect us from ever seeing the areas where we have no points, because our privilege is picking up the slack for us. Norm might have 0 points in agility, but he's never going to see that until he's out in the wasteland trying to land VATS shots on Deathclaws and sees that his AP regen is trash. Those of us with less privilege padding can't escape our weak points, so we don't have the luxury to convince ourselves that the reason we feel so different and uncomfortable is because we're just like so on another level. Attributing autistic traits to being a genius is dangerous. It encourages supremacist thinking, and it impairs personal growth. Because if we think we're geniuses, we're less likely to question our genius. In fact, the idea that our genius can be questioned makes us feel unsafe. By focusing on how clever Norm is, Betty is exploiting his attachment to his own intelligence. She knows him well enough to know that if he's given the choice between being liked or being smart, he was going to choose being smart. Like we talked about, autistic people will be more loyal to things making sense than to other people. Not because we lack some sort of crucial social skills, but because logic and the truth are more reliable than people are and we aren't gamblers. Betty just told him that his anger will disrupt the status quo. And that is exactly what he wants. He thinks if his anger is disruptive, that means it's powerful and can make a difference. Exactly what he wants after cowering in that storage unit. So if she truly wants him to tread carefully, saying that to him does not seem to be in her best interest. So she must be pretty smug. Unless she's pretty clever. Unless she's counting on him doing the exact opposite of what she's telling him to do. Remember, kids, you show people what makes you angry, you hand them your puppet strings. The next time we see Norm is when he's given the Jell-O cake to the Raiders and then gives the rest of it to Veronica, the security personnel who hangs out on the terminal, and who we see get arrested once the Raiders are poisoned. I'll be honest, I haven't totally figured out this scene yet. It couldn't really be that related to the poisoning. It had to have taken place way before. We will tie up what we do know at the very end of this, so definitely hit me with your theories in the comments. After that, Norm tries to talk tough to the Raiders, condemning their actions against the innocent people of Vault 32. But to his surprise, one of the Raiders says that the people of Vault 32 were far from innocent. Dun dun dun! This plants a seed of doubt in Norm's mind that compels him to investigate further. But Norm's not feeling confident enough to investigate Vault 32 alone, so he seeks out Chet as his companion for this quest. At the entrance, clearing rubble, Chet admits he's not enjoying himself. So Norm asks Chet why he's there. Chet says he doesn't know. Then Norm says, "You don't think it's because you're still in love with my sister and being around me reminds you of her?" Here's that autistic bird's eye view again. A couple times I've mentioned how autistic people build their reality with a sense of distance from other people. As a result, we might discuss others in a way that seems cold, like it's from a detached vantage point, as if we're intentionally distancing ourselves. It can make people feel judged, rejected, or even used or manipulated. But that's not the intention. Norm's treatment of Chet here can shine a light on how the concept of manipulation operates differently in autistic and allistic minds. To the allistic, to be authentic is to not consciously think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. You're supposed to let go, be yourself, and not try to manually control your social interactions. But autistic people are always consciously thinking about what we're doing. We have to. There's no switch to turn that off. So we don't see it as manipulation unless we're being underhanded or dishonest. This is just us functioning. Meanwhile, because allistic people don't have to think about why they do everything they do, they often don't. That's why Norm was more aware of what motivated Chet's behavior than Chet was. Norm is thinking more about why Chet is doing what he's doing than Chet is. Allistics are weird. From an autistic perspective, it looks like they just mindlessly bump into each other and accidentally get stuff done sometimes. Once inside, the duo discovers that Vault 32 has clearly been abandoned for some time. As they navigate through the admin area, past piles of debris and disturbing scenes, the situation grows increasingly grim. There's a blood-stained foosball table with a body impaled with a rod nearby. The body's Pip-Boy reveals his last life sign was 2 years ago. Another Vault Dweller appears to have committed suicide by shoving a fork in a toaster. There's a creepy documentary about cannibalistic mice playing in the background. A message written in blood says, "We know the truth." They see bodies that show signs of mutual strangulation and several suicides by hanging. The overseer's body is found bound and quite deceased. Chet at this point has seen more than he can process and says, "I think it's safe to say they went bananas." But Norm still needs to know how the Raiders got in. Move over, Chet. The autistic needs it to make sense. Chet sees blood on the wall that says death to management and says these people are crazy. If there were any survivors down here, they probably opened the door and welcomed the Raiders right in. This scene does a good job pointing out the problem I have with calling people crazy. Terms like crazy, lazy, or statements like, "I don't understand," are often used when people refuse to acknowledge that there might be valuable knowledge that they lack. When they want to excuse themselves from wrapping their heads around the complexity of another human being's personal circumstances. No one is simply crazy, especially not entire groups. We live in an all-inclusive universe where nothing is without origin. Just because we don't know the reason behind someone's actions doesn't mean there isn't one. Our culture has a habit of assuming that understanding someone's behavior equates endorsing it. If someone commits a horrible act and we seek to understand what drove them, someone's going to be upset we're suggesting their actions weren't entirely their fault. We need the buck to stop at a guilty party, the crazy person, so the problem is nice and easy to manage. But maybe the problem isn't easy to manage. Pretending it is wastes time. If you don't want to do the work, that's fine. Just stop shouting crazy and step out of the way and let those willing to do it take over from here. The Overseer terminal logs show the vault door was opened from the outside with a Pip-Boy. As he digs deeper, he uncovers that the Pip-Boy used belonged to his mother. Dun dun dun. Walking out of Vault 32, Chet tries to find some rationale, so he suggests maybe the logs they found were falsified. When Norm questions what motivation someone would have to do that, Chet is just frustrated that Norm needs that answer. Yeah, raise your hand if you're an autistic person that pisses people off because you ask too many questions.
Why are you asking these tangential questions? Stop it!
Norm and Chet are on a trajectory that is pulling them toward the truth, but pushing them away from the social status quo. For reasons aforementioned, Norm likes that. Norm is gonna feel safer moving that direction, but Chet is not. Poor Chet just wants to go home, but Norm insists on checking one last thing, so they're off to the entrance of Vault 31. And I want to address real fast how Norm isn't being that respectful to Chet right now. Autistic people tend to be anxious for control and not yield to social pressures as expected, and that can come off like we're being bossy and insensitive, but it's more that we don't fully grasp the influence we have over a social situation, and we're assuming people are going to do whatever they want, regardless of what we say. So if you have an autistic friend like this, you may be surprised how often they'll let you wriggle free if you're honest. They arrive at the 31 door, and it is quite the macabre sight. A pile of bodies in vault suits, desperately stacked as if they were trying to get inside. A bloody note on the wall ominously declares, "We know what's in there." We watch the show, we know what's in there too. Budsickles. Chet has about had his fill of dark revelations for the day, so he asserts that it's time to leave. As they head back into Vault 33, they're nearly immediately stopped by Betty, who, noticing their disheveled and suspicious appearance, asks what they've been up to. They awkwardly blurt that they were planting potatoes, like middle schoolers caught with a joint behind the gym. Betty gives them a skeptical look, but appears to let it slide. Interesting how Norm is once again able to get in and out of 32 without being noticed or encountering any resistance whatsoever. And you know what else is interesting? That smile on her face. What do y'all think? Is she really smug, or is she really clever? Vault 33 gears up for its election. The chalkboard details the candidates for Overseer: Betty Pearson, Reggie McPhee, and Woody Thomas. Vault citizens are enthusiastically lining up at the polling booth. In line, Davy, apologetic yet candid, confesses to Reg that he plans to vote for Betty, citing her experience as crucial during these uncertain times. Reg assures Davy that there are no hard feelings and reminds him that privacy and voting exists for a reason. But Davy continues in a nervous, talkative manner, suggesting he respects Reg and feels guilty for not supporting him. When Reg goes in to vote, he says, "Who am I kidding?" and votes for Betty. At this point, we're wondering if Betty really is everyone's presumed victor, if Davy is manipulating Reg, or both. On a terminal, Norm looks up the records of personnel distribution. His findings reveal a curious pattern. All of the elected overseers, including his own father, originated from Vault 31. And it's announced that Betty, also from Vault 31, has been elected the new overseer with a 98% majority. The show skillfully juxtaposes this reveal with a comically wobbling Jell-O mold. Jell-O is beginning to establish itself as a visual motif representing an unstable artificial mold. Reg and Woody are gracious losers. Norm approaches Betty with a smile to congratulate her on her win. She cuts him a slice of Jell-O cake, but watches him forebodingly as he walks away. While Woody's reflecting on his election loss, Davy offers words that are polite but subtly dismissive. He suggests a sort of inevitability to how things turned out. He seems to think Betty was the right person for the job, in part because leadership from Vault 31 is not just practical, but practically preordained. He shares his own past experience running for office, mentioning he lost to Hank McLean during an event apparently called the Weevil Famine. He concludes with the adage, "When things look glum, vote for somebody from Vault 31. He seems to feel like putting other names on the ballot is little more than a procedural formality. Probably now safe to say that Davy is trying to get in Reg and Woody's heads. We just saw his conversation with Reg in the polling line, and since we watched the show, we know that Lucy was lied to about her mother's death in the Great Plague of 77, so if he's telling the Weevil Famine story to sway political opinion, that event is sus as well. Maybe it's not as bad though. Maybe it's the lesser of two weevils.
One must always choose the lesser of two weevils.
Norm visits Chet at Steph's unit to talk about what he discovered about Vault 31. Chet plays with Steph's newborn with a rattle. Norm whispers, "You don't think it's weird we always select an overseer from Vault 31? They did the exact same thing in Vault 32. Chet attributes Vault 31's success rate to better resources, education, not to mention that catchy slogan. And then Moises Arias makes this perfect face as we watch Chet shake this baby rattle. We feel exactly how Norm feels about Chet right now. He asks, "You think 200 years of coincidence comes down to a slogan?" And then Chet says, "You may as well be asking why everyone prefers Jell-O cake to apple pie. I don't know why, they just do." Jell-O is back to remind us of being shaped or molded. Jell-O doesn't naturally form those perfect shapes, it adapts to the mold it's settled in. And that's what Chet is doing. He's doing here what he did in Vault 32, claiming there are no answers simply because he'd rather settle into his mold than find out what he's being molded to. People don't naturally prefer Jell-O cake for no reason. There are reasons. The conversation takes a more cautious tone when Chet indicates that they should keep the discussion hush and quiet around Steph because she's from Vault 31. Steph pops out with perfect timing, and Norm takes the opportunity to ask her about the differences between Vault 31 and Vault 33. She asks, "What did your dad tell you?" Norm says, "Not much, that's why I'm asking." She says, "Gee, I don't know. Maybe the mashed potatoes were a little better." Norm smiles and says, "That's what my dad used to say." Chet looks a little uncomfortable, and then Steph says, "Must be true then." Norm agrees, "Must be true then." This exchange draws our attention to how often our idea of the truth is mostly just based on what we hear the people around us corroborate. If I said it, he said it, and she said it, it must be true. It's chilling to consider the implications of what a bunch of people who have gotten their story straight are capable of accomplishing in the pursuit of brainwashing a population. Betty gathers everyone at the entrance of Vault 32 to announce a significant resettlement campaign.
Some of us will stay home to rebuild 33. Others will be moving into Vault 32 in the coming weeks to start anew.
As the community steps inside of Vault 32, Norm and Chet witness a stark transformation. The gruesome scenes they encountered earlier have been erased as if they never existed. This cleanup means only Norm and Chet know the true horrors that once lay within. Other than the people who cleaned it, of course. Amidst this orchestrated normalcy, Betty's voice over the intercom reminds everyone of their fortunate status compared to the harsh outside world, emphasizing we are the lucky ones, which, given what Norm just saw, is pretty creepy. It looks like Norm's feeling uneasy, and moves to the overseer's room to collect his thoughts. Betty pops in and casually asks, "Find anything interesting?" "Well, now that you mention it." Norm boldly responds, "Great job cleaning up." Betty says, "The raiders destroyed so much, but not our spirits, and not our plans." Norm also has the guts to ask about what happened to his mother's Pip-Boy. Betty says it was buried with her. When Norm asks how she's so sure, she says, "Because I buried her myself. Me and your father." Her prolonged look following her explanation presses Norm to accept her version of events. But at this point, she's highly suspect for using reverse psychology. The scene closes with Norm gazing at the empty overseer chair, probably wondering who's gonna fill it. Later, a montage shows us Norm's routine of delivering food to the raiders over an unspecified amount of time. We start off seeing him with a dinner meal that includes mashed potatoes, and then we see the Jell-O cake again, then we're back to the mashed potatoes. The montage ends with a shot of him watching intently as the raiders eat while we hear the intercom tell us Betty will be giving out new vault assignments later that day. They may be making the timing of events purposely unclear to make what happens next trickier to figure out. Norm comes to work and notices a raider in a vault suit being stretchered away, followed by another. At the raiders' quarters, he finds they're all dead. Betty and Woody are already present discussing the situation. Woody says the medic suspects rat poison. And as Norm absorbs this horrifying information, he spots Veronica being detained by security, insisting on her innocence. Betty, ever the politician, laments even more death in the vault. And she lashes out at Norm. "What did I tell you, Norman? Words have meaning." Woody sternly says, "People are going to be upset when they hear about this." Betty just scoffs that off with, "People like to have something to fuss about." I'm really curious what Woody and Betty were talking about before Norm got there, because he doesn't have the vibe I would expect from him in this moment. I would think he would sound reactive and panicked, but he sounds concerned and suspicious. He says people are going to be upset when they hear about this, like he's holding Betty responsible in a way that goes beyond her responsibilities as overseer. Betty takes this moment of crisis as an opportunity to announce everyone's vault reassignment and steer the community's focus. We get clued in regarding several key residents. Norm is to remain in Vault 33. Woody, on the other hand, is reassigned to Vault 32, a change he is less than pleased about. Meanwhile, Steph is aglow about her move to Vault 32, with Chet looking less than pleased behind her. Davy's also thrilled about moving to 32. Slimy little fink. This elation adds a deeper layer to his meddling during the recent election. We're hinting that his political support for Betty was a calculated move. Moving to Vault 32 might be moving up in some way for him. Norm goes to see Chet, and Steph is still slaying in that deliciously sinister eye patch. She says, "It's just terrible about the raiders, isn't it?" Reminding us of their ominous conversation from before and making us wonder what her involvement may have been. Whatever it was, she's being real careful with that non-committal language. Freaking allistics, am I right? She says to Chet, "I'm holding the baby, so you have to pack everything," which paints a picture of their domestic dynamic. And once again, maybe a little wink to the Manosphere guys in the audience. Chet tells Norm that he and Steph are starting a new life together in Vault 32. If you watched the End of My Privilege Ignorance video, then you might get an idea of what they're referencing when he mentions a starter family unit. Norm says, "So you're just gonna forget about everything we've seen?" Which actually sounds dubbed and abrupt.
Oh. So you're just gonna forget about everything we've seen?
I don't don't think the line is necessary. Maybe it's there to clarify his stance a little more, or possibly clarify that Norm doesn't just love Chet's coffee pot. Chet says, I feel like this is a good moment for a fresh start. Norm, with that astonishment, says, you think so? Chet, looking at the Pip-Boy where he got his directive, says, someone obviously does, cluing us into his willingness to just do as he's told. He feels a resignation to their circumstances. With a wry smile, Norm says, you're a coward. You know that, Chet? It wouldn't surprise me to find out that it's common for autistic people to have a special kind of hatred for cowardly behavior. I know I do. In fact, I mentioned as much for unrelated reasons in one of my comment response videos. We all know bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about feeling the fear and doing it anyway. From that perspective, autistic people are some of the bravest on Earth. We have sensitive nervous systems. We have to be brave every day just to function. Before sitting down for this very recording session, I had to squeeze out the most spectacular, self-pitying cry about how hard my life is and how nobody cares. And then I just wiped my tears and just recorded, because I have to. So it's hard to feel bad sometimes when an allistic person won't be brave just one time when it's really important. It feels like the world demands it from us every day, but we can never ask for it back. And once again, autistic people need things to make sense more than they need friends. If a friend needs us to believe something that doesn't make sense, we can't share reality with them anymore, so we can't really be friends with them anymore. From Norm's perspective, Chet is abandoning him, leaving him behind, alone, with the horrors of reality, to fend for himself, because he has the allistic privilege to not need things to make sense to move forward. So Norm calls him a coward, and Chet poignantly responds, we all are, Norm. That's why we live in a vault. Almost as if to say, you're no better than me, Norm. And look at Norm's face. He agrees with him. This is a moment of mutual recognition that despite their bravery or intentions, the reality of living in a vault forces everyone in it into cowardice in one form or another. Norm's not only disgusted with Chet's cowardice, he's disgusted with his own. Bravery is a quality that he strongly values, and he's disgusted whenever he sees cowardice in anyone, including or especially himself. Autistic people hate hypocrisy and love internally consistent schemas. What Chet said is going to compel Norm to reach a state of inner alignment. If he truly believes that cowardice is repulsive, then he cannot be cowardly. The autism demands it! Betty makes a speech marking the transition of some residents to Vault 32. The ceremony takes an unexpected turn when Woody, visibly distressed, vehemently protests his reassignment, repeating, I'm not going, I'm not going. I don't live there. I don't live there. Woody's meltdown suggests a brewing discontent that could foreshadow a dramatic shift in his loyalty come next season. This was hinted at in the very first episode. During the Raider attack, Woody shouts, "Get that Jell-O cake out of here!" suggesting that this was a time to break the mold. The old paradigm would no longer be working, and they made a strong point to make sure that we saw that Woody saw that. Shortly after Woody regains composure, Betty unexpectedly announces Steph as the new overseer of Vault 32, a decision made without an election, in consultation with a mysterious, so-called High Council. Does anybody know what High Council she's talking about? Is she just talking about Bud? Is there a Vault-Tec leadership hub somewhere? What the heck? She didn't even run. She didn't even run in the election. Anyway, regardless, another win for Vault 31. And another loss for democracy. Chet and Norm exchange knowing looks. Norm's like, "You see that?" And Chet's like, yeah, I do see that. As the meeting concludes, Norm heads directly to the Overseer's terminal. And the scene showcases a hacking sequence that looks exactly like the actual hacking visuals from the game! If I may geek out for a second. Like, it's actually a solvable puzzle. And I'm stoked. So many movies and TV shows have hacking or computer screens that are clearly unrealistic if you look up close, but in Fallout, the hacking screens actually look pretty legit. I've always thought that if I were to make a Fallout show or movie, there's no reason not to use these actual screens. And it's awesome to see that the creators of the show agreed with me on that. Norm pretends to be Betty, aka the Overseer of Vault 33, and initiates a conversation with the Overseer of Vault 31. The Vault 31 Overseer, sensing something amiss, inquires if Norm, thinking he's Betty, is compromised. Norm vaguely explains that things aren't proceeding as planned. He is then summoned, urgently, to Vault 31. Once again, we see Norm do his self-hyping, getting brave face thing before he journeys onward. He is not a coward. As Norm steps into the enigmatic Vault 31, he is immediately greeted by what the subtitles literally call a brain in a Roomba. It's muttering to itself, and it's stuck in a loop, just like a Roomba vacuum robot getting stuck behind furniture. Initially mistaking Norm for Betty, or at least pretending as much, the brain scans Norm and realizes that he is not Betty or Hank, but shares 50% of Hank's DNA. When Norm clarifies that that's because he's Hank's son, the brain reacts with alarm, indicating that Norm's presence was not part of the plan, even though it probably was. The brain declares it must initiate Protocol 53, and advances toward Norm with a syringe, attempting to enforce compliance through some form of chemical coercion. It insists it won't answer Norm's questions unless he allows the injection. But big shocker, Norm does not allow the injection. And there's nothing going on that is gonna make him do so. The brain being inept is amusing all on its own, but it's also a perfect image of Norm's worst nightmare. At the beginning of the season, we saw how scared and small Norm feels. The cringe we experience watching the Roomba struggle with the simplest attack reflects Norm's insecurities. He feels like a brain in a jar, intellectually bountiful, but physically inert. Despite the cultural platitudes he grew up with insisting it's what's on the inside that counts, Norm is seeing constant evidence that the natural order of things requires him to be tougher and braver, no matter how smart and fair he is. So Norm ignores the brain's warnings and proceeds to march specifically into the area the brain had desperately warned him against entering. Sheesh, it doesn't look like the security of Vault 31 is very good, does it? They must have been pretty smug. Or, maybe they were clever enough to realize that Norm is totally ego-identified with the idea that he's smarter than everybody else and that was gonna prime him to believe that it was far more likely that they were smug idiots than that he walked right into their trap. Norm's venture deeper into Vault 31 unveils a chilling revelation. The vault is filled with cryogenic pods, which house what the brain refers to as Bud's buds. His buds. He's Bud. He says the survival of the nation was outsourced to the private sector, including Vault-Tec. But Vault-Tec didn't strive to preserve the nation itself, because a failed nation is a bad investment. So it preserved Vault-Tec's vision instead, a future under their management. He tells Norm Vaults 32 and 33 have served as breeding pools, designed to genetically engineer a superior class of super managers. Optimists and problem solvers who can repopulate and manage the Earth after the surface had been cleansed. Norm expresses a firm desire to leave. But Bud chillingly informs him that his knowledge makes it impossible for him to do so, and he has to stay in Vault 31 until it's deemed safe to resurface, a timeline that could span centuries. He suggests Norm wait it out in his father's pod, a horrifying yet practical solution to avoid starvation. The season ends with Norm in a precarious situation that encapsulates how he feels overall. Abandoned, helpless, alone with his awareness, a brain in a jar. With Norm, the show has set up a character who believes he is smarter than everyone else but recognizes that intelligence is useless without physical power. Who does that remind you of? Come on, Fallout fans. What Fallout character is convinced he's smarter than everyone else and uses that intelligence to build up physical force? Anyone? Any guesses there? I don't know, maybe a dictator of some sort?
I prefer the term autocrat.
In an interview with Variety, Fallout showrunners confirmed that Robert Edwin House, who we already saw briefly in Season 1, will be involved with the story of Season 2. And we're gonna talk about that. But first, let's process Season 1. Norm fans might come out of this season feeling like nothing gets past this guy. Norm is a man who sees through the facade. Does he though? Have you not been playing along with our game of smug or clever? Norm revealed himself as a potential threat to the Vault 31 conspiracy multiple times, yet faced almost no opposition in uncovering it. That is sus. When Norm backtalks during his disciplinary meeting, he basically said, "I won't play ball. Better not let me have any power or freedom whatsoever." And during the assembly, he basically advertised himself as a patsy. At that point, pretty much anyone who wanted to kill the Raiders could pin it on his back, and anyone who was in that room would probably believe them. Seems likely to me that Vault 31 tricked Norm into making his way to the cryo booth so they could trap and freeze him. Then he'd be out of the way, and bonus, they could pin the Raider poisonings on him. When Norm showed his hand at the assembly, I think Steph thought she could nudge him toward doing the deed himself. Betty may very well have hoped her conversation with Norm would lead to him quietly handling the Raider problem for her, but regardless, there appears to have been a thought-out plan B. But it had to be timed very carefully. He couldn't be gone when the poisoning happened, but he needed to be gone not long after. Woody may have had such a strange attitude when Norm walked in after the Raiders died, because he found some sort of evidence it was an inside job. Step 1 was Betty's ego-stroking reverse psychology with the pie. Next, did Vault 31 get the Raider to nudge Norm like that? Plausible, but not necessary. They may have just plopped Norm in that job, left the doors to Vault 32 and 31 unguarded, and just watched and waited. Something was gonna happen that was gonna make him go look. When Norm and Chet come out of 32, I think Betty is well aware that they weren't planning Tatoes. It makes sense that she would wait for Norm to see Vault 32 before they started cleaning it up. She's probably smiling because everything is going to plan. She's not worried about Chet because Chet plays ball. It's unclear if Betty intended for Norm to find out about his mother's Pip-Boy, but that probably doesn't matter to her if he's just going to end up in a cryotube. In the meantime, whatever keeps him believing he's got the upper hand, that's where she wants him. She does seem to be aware that Norm is suspicious of Vault 31, though, based on her next move. They couldn't poison the Raiders until they had a plan that would get Norm into Vault 31 afterwards quickly. Once Betty got a chance to be seen by others scolding Norm, she wasted no time. Like within seconds, she announced everyone's new room assignments, because she needed to tee up Steph's announcement as Vault 32 overseer. That was the final triggering event that sent Norm through the roof and literally straight to the door of Vault 31 by himself. He had to be there by himself, which is why it was so important for Steph to get Chet under control. And of course we can't overlook how Bud did absolutely nothing to prevent Norm from discovering Vault 31's secret. It's almost like he was told to pretend like he didn't want Norm to find out. Maybe he came off like a bad liar because he was a bad liar. I feel like I'd be doing the plot a disservice if I didn't point out we aren't sure whether or not Norm is innocent at this point. And maybe no one else is either. Like maybe from Betty's perspective, she was waiting for him to kill the Raiders and she thinks she successfully tricked him into doing it. I just don't think so. Mostly because of how totally unguarded 32 has been and the look on her face after they came out of it. Norm's is the story of someone being manipulated by the very forces they think they are outsmarting. Not because Norm is a fool. He's not. He's just alone. And to an extent, we are all fools alone. One perspective is just not enough. That's why the universe made so goddamn many of them. This presents a problem for autistic people, though. Human groups tend to really want conformity, and autistic people are just not about that life. The people Norm feels closest to in the world, Lucy and Hank, rejected him. They rejected him and they trained him to reject himself. He believes he's weak, that he's a coward, that he doesn't have what it takes to help people, and that he has to change. That is the loving messaging that he got from his family. No one in that vault has ever allowed Norm to be Norm, including Norm. These people are not on his side. He has no safety net, no backup, no help. And he doesn't trust anyone, including himself. But at least there's a chance he can earn his own trust. If he can figure out everything by himself, this is where his head's at. He has to be the solo harbinger of the objective truth. To survive. What other choice does he have? His survival depends on being a genius. This is a very dangerous coping mechanism for autistic people. It makes us proud of ourselves for being stubborn, because that feels like we're not puppets. It makes us defend ourselves from counter-arguments because they feel like attacks, and if you try to tell us otherwise, it just feels like gaslighting. And it makes us vulnerable to extremist groups, conspiracy theories, and cults because nuanced approaches feel like wiggle room for danger. Norm's story warns us how vulnerable we can be if we're too afraid of being vulnerable. How wrong we can become if we're terrified of being wrong. To anyone who needs to hear this, believe me when I tell you that you need allies more than you need to be a genius. There is no escaping the value of other perspectives. And if I may indulge my own sociopolitical agenda for a spell, I hope to God some neurodivergent progressives like myself take away some insight here on why we are losing so many autistic white men to the creepiest parts of the internet. This, right here, this is what we look like. Smug and dense. And super privileged, which is ironic, because we're the ones who are supposed to understand what it's like to not have privilege. We really do look like this. It is not all Fox News. And we need to take some responsibility for this reputation. The autistic guys I'm talking about here read Ayn Rand and reject collective responsibility because they don't get collective support. They don't receive it, so they don't count on it, so they don't value it, so they don't understand it. If we don't acknowledge at least some of this shit, we're just like Chet in Vault 32. Looking away from the whole story because it's not easy enough to manage. The world's got problems that aren't easy to manage. It would be easier if we worked together. And it would be easier to work together if we listened to each other. And also, please, can we keep in mind that white autistic men who don't know they're autistic have no idea they're not privileged white men when we talk shit about privileged white men. That is a lot of suffering autistic people getting the message that we don't think their suffering matters. We're talking about guys who in a lot of cases are inches from unaliving. Yes, I know they talk a lot of shit, but they talk a lot of shit because they don't know any better. See, told you, I'm a progressive. Let's let's talk about season 2, but I don't want to think of these like predictions. More like where I feel like things are going. But like if you'd asked me in episode 4, I would have said Lucy was going to leverage the vials against the ghoul. That's where it felt like it was going. But the show subverted my expectations in the best possible way, so I want to leave it wiggle room to do that again. First off, I think Norm is going to science his way out of Vault 31. He'll do a hacking or a rewiring or do something like, I don't know, with coils.
The Tesla coils in its head.
He's going to want to confront his dad, so I think he's going to get to New Vegas. No idea how, but I do have an idea of what he might do when he gets there. He's going to find House's stuff. Yes, for all you Jonathan Colton fans, it's going to be the future soon, and Norm won't always be this way. The things that make him weak and strange will be engineered away.
You have a new spine. Use it.
For those not familiar with this character yet, Mr. House is a brilliant, wealthy, pre-war entrepreneur in the Fallout universe, and a major character in Fallout New Vegas. He founded Robco Industries and played a pivotal role in Fallout's technological advancements. He used his resources and intellect to protect himself and Vegas from the Great War, and maintain control over the city thereafter. In New Vegas, the player decides whether or not they're going to help him continue with that control. When we get to Vegas in season 2 of the show, I don't think Mr. House is going to be alive. It would take a whole other video to unpack why. But the spirit of what he represented and all his toys will be all over the place. It's Fallout, we're gonna scavenge the ruins. I'm not good at analyzing this sort of thing, but I feel like when you look at the still, that doesn't look like a city that's still active to me. But if anybody has a deeper analysis on this, I'd really love to see it. But for the purposes of this video, imagine Norm, with everything that he's experienced, surrounded by all that Mr. House would have left behind. Think about it. He doesn't believe in people. People lie, demand, cower, and obey. He feels like he's the only independent thinker on the planet. He believes in physical power. The Raiders almost killed him because they had it, and he hid in a storage unit because he didn't. He believes he's a genius. He thinks he solved the mystery all by himself. And thanks to Vault privilege and Vault manipulation, he's been insulated from seeing his weak points. It would make perfect sense for Norm to apply his super brain to the pursuit of absolute power and control exactly the way House did. Betty had said to Norm earlier, when clever boys like you are angry, you're lucky not to have seen where that can lead. We know Betty is pre-war, and she was in the building when Mr. House was in the Vault Tech meeting. It seems plausible that she, like me, sees similarities between Mr. House and Norm. You guessed it, I do also think Mr. House is an autistic-coded character. If you have ever spent time with an autistic person who just really needed to have things their way, you know what I'm talking about. That's what Mr. House really wanted, the poor dear. A regulated nervous system. He just saw no way to accomplish that other than ultimate power. And to an autistic person, that makes weird sense. The idea of having control over our lives without the hassle of cooperating with others is highly appealing to many of us. But with every aspect of modern life so interconnected, it can look like the only way to get out of cooperating with people is to have them entirely under your control. I'm anticipating a conflict between Lucy's optimism and Norm's disillusionment. And I'm not gonna lie, would be kinda cool to see Norm's Securitrons. If this video made you worry that you might be autistic, or made you feel like I'm trying to convince you that you're autistic, don't worry. Or if you're like me and you hate it when people tell you don't worry, because it's like they're telling you what emotions to have, I'm just trying to communicate, I come in peace. There's a reason I defined the term as a tool in the beginning of the video. The great thing about a tool is you decide whether or not that tool is useful to you. I'm just saying if you have a leak, it's okay to use the wrench. But if you say there's no leak, or you say you'd rather hire a plumber, that is your business. Yes, the thing we call autism is real. But it isn't autism any more than the word tree is a tree. You can't change what you are, but you're the boss of what labels are appropriate for you and what tools are going to get your needs met. Autism operates in a paradigm, and if that paradigm isn't useful to you, you are entitled to reject it. Don't let me or any other uppity autistic person pressure you into claiming the label for our benefit. Of course it would benefit us. You would strengthen our community. Autistic people need help. Getting that help is a movement, and movements need numbers. But I don't want to be Caesar's Legion about it and make anybody feel pushed into joining my forces. And I don't want to be NCR about it either and sound all diplomatic and fair while I'm doing my own underhanded shit. No, I want to be honest. If you are autistic, I hope you find out that you're autistic and that you're proud to be autistic. And if you're not autistic, I hope that you learn about autism and help make the lives of autistic people in your community a little better. Thank you. That's my agenda. This one was for the norms, the misfits, the truth tellers, and truth seekers. Norms can see things others can't see and can do things others can't do. They have contributions to make and deserve to live in communities that value their perspectives. By constantly suggesting we need to change or we need a cure of some sort, people aren't only asking to extract a very meaningful aspect from our lives, but also theirs. We may look like we lack common sense sometimes, but that's because we have uncommon sense. Autistic people are canaries in coal mines. If we insist something is off, it's worth at least checking it out. Communities benefit from neurodiversity. We generally wish others would appreciate our insights or see value in our way of doing things, rather than try to push us to move at their speed. Or here's a thought, maybe walk with us sometime. There is stuff worth checking out between the fast travel points. At the very least, we want to be given enough time and space to make our journeys our way. The norms of this world are trapped in a game they can't win. To the wasteland, the vaults may look like a privileged paradise, but for some people they are no better than prisons. There's nothing for Norm down there. No progress, no future, no love, no happiness. Just the persistent, nagging feeling that something is profoundly wrong. And the persistent uncertainty whether it's them or him. Wherever Norm's story goes, I hope by the end he finally realizes that he was never weak or cowardly. Nor did he have an 18-carat run of bad luck. The game was rigged from the start. And that was the Norm video. It's finally done. We got it done faster than I expected. I really wanted to learn DaVinci on my next video edit, but I decided I really had to unburden myself of this video and move on with my life. I had said that I really wanted to clean up my workflow because working with Adobe is driving me insane, and that is still totally true. If you've got some spare change and can help out with my workflow woes, thank you to everybody who has helped me get 2 out of the 4 solid-state drives that I need to make my footage server. I really like doing specific cutaways to things like showing that you can find stuff between the fast travel points, for instance. And that kind of thing is a lot easier if I had all of my footage together, properly tagged with keywords, so I can pull visual references to any Fallout thing that I want. You can make that possible. The link to my Throne wishlist is in the description. Technology right now is driving me freaking insane. I can't believe I'm outside recording this outro on my iPhone, like the filthy proletariat, because OBS has decided it's not gonna recognize my webcam anymore, and I have no idea why. If anybody has production video image software that just works consistently, and it's easy to fix when it breaks. That's it. I just want things to work. Okay, but this time there really will be a pause before the next one because I actually have to tend to like other aspects of my life. Whoever's interested in the autism stuff, I've got links to my other accounts in the description. I do have an autistic holistic communication class coming up, one for autistics, one for holistics. One of the reasons I had to hustle and finish this Norm video so I could actually like finish working on that class. I also haven't posted a new video to the Lindsay Makes Videos channel in a really long time. That's the neurodivergence and trauma healing channel. So next week I should really be making a video for that. But in the meantime, let's see your comments on this video and talk about what we want to talk about next time. I've got some ideas, and let's see what generates the most interest. It's hilarious that we haven't talked about Maximus at all yet, because I swear, y'all, my first time watching the show, the character that I related to the most, that stirred up the most emotions in me, was actually Maximus. And I know people, even in my personal life, are really curious about my take on Dane, being a genderqueer transmasculine character. Obviously, there's a lot to be said about Mr. House, my favorite Fallout character. I feel like if I was gonna do Mr. House, it would, once again, probably be autism stuff. Probably talking about, like, what it feels like inside of the mind of somebody who thinks like that. Masculinity and the Brotherhood of Steel. And then another topic that's been really floating around my head is communism. Not specifically, like, it wouldn't be a video about communism. That's not my area to talk about communism. It is, however, my area to talk about how Americans, my generation, feel about the fear of communism. And I'm seeing that perspective addressed more and more in a lot of different shows. So yeah, let me know! And follow me on all the things, like, subscribe, and I'll see you when I see you.
If you have to go out, take a gun and a lamp, 'cause everybody knows there's a devil in camp.